So we'll be starting this in another few minutes' time. We are waiting for some more to join.
So ඌ කාලේ ඉන්නවා දා 4ක්.
Dr. Maheeka, please start.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Today we are having our 8th SLEvA M&E webinars out of 25. This is gender responsive evaluation. Thank you for joining this session. And now we have our two experts with us. Who is moving the slide?
Pasindu, please move the slide. Pasindu, please go back to the other slide. Back.
Oh, yeah. Now, this webinar is been arranged in partnership with COE, Community of Evaluators South Asia. Next slide. And I am Executive Council member of SLEvA, and I'm a specialist in public health. I'll be moderating today's session, and I would again like to welcome all of you. And I know you have joined this, and know you will be actively listening and actively participating in this session. And I would like to remind you about being mindful of usage of the camera and the microphone. And please keep your microphone muted until end of the session, where you can unmute and ask the questions based on the areas they presented, and even you can type your questions in the chat box so that we can take it at the end of the session. Next slide, please. Now, opening remarks will be by Ms. Vennila Thevarajah. She is the Joint Secretary of SLEvA. Over to you, Vennila.
Good evening, everyone. Warm welcome to all joining us from Sri Lanka, across South Asia and beyond. I'm Vennila Thevarajah, Joint Secretary of Sri Lanka Evaluation Association. I'm delighted to open this month's webinar hosted by the Sri Lanka Evaluation Association with special partnership for this session from the community of Evaluators-South Asia. Tonight's session focuses on a topic that is central to building fair and effective development practices: gender-responsive evaluation. As we work towards the Sustainable Development Goals and inclusive growth, ensuring that our evaluation method reflects gender perspectives is no longer optional. It is essential for meaningful change. We are honored to have with us two distinguished speakers who bring deep expertise and decades of experience. Dr. Rajib Nandi, Vice President of Knowledge Management and Capacity Development at Sambodhi Research and Communications, India. Dr. Nandi has led pioneering research and evaluation initiatives for nearly 3 decades, working with national governments, UN agencies, and international donors. He currently serves as Chairperson of the Community of Evaluators-South Asia and sits on the boards of several global evaluation bodies. Ms. Nidhi Sen, an independent gender and evaluation expert and Fulbright scholar. Nidhi has designed and led gender-responsive evaluations with organizations ranging from UNDP, UN Women to grassroots groups such as SLEvA. Her work highlights participatory methods and theory of change aligned to health systems, making her insights invaluable to our discussions. Over the next hour, we will explore practical approaches, lessons learned, and ways forward for integrating gender responsiveness into evaluation practice across diverse contexts. On behalf of the Sri Lanka Evaluation Association and our partners at Community of Evaluators-South Asia, thank you for dedicating your time and expertise to this important dialogue. Let's engage, question, and share ideas that can strengthen the field of evaluation for greater equity. With that note, I'm pleased to invite our speakers, Dr. Rajib Nandi and Ms. Nidhi Sen, to begin today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity to come and make this presentation, speak in this webinar on gender responsive evaluation. So we, Rajib Nandi, and on behalf of my colleague Nidhi, we were definitely expressing our thanks to the SLEvA and Professor Maheeka for moderating this session. Okay, so good that now already the presentation is there. Yeah. So could you please go to the next slide? Yeah, great. So so as Vennila already mentioned, today's webinar is on gender responsive evaluation. And before we start, what is gender responsive evaluation? I would like to remind you. I think you all know what is evaluation, which is basically an developmental instrument to assess or judge a development program or development intervention, whether it is effective or impactful or not, as per the kind of directions of the project goals. In contrast or in continuation, gender responsive evaluation is about ensuring that programs are not just effective. It demands attention to power, equity, and rights rather than just efficiency. So it looks at how intervention affect men and women and diverse groups differently, and whether they contribute to gender equality, women's empowerment, and human rights. It is also kind of a participatory process that makes sure that women's voices and perspectives shape the evaluation and its findings. So, for example, if we evaluate, suppose a rural livelihood program, okay, through a gender-responsive approach, then this means we would not only measure the income gains by the families or the households, but also ask very fundamental questions like, did women gain equal access to the training program that was conducted under this intervention? Where their workloads, the women's workloads reduced or increased as a kind of a result of the intervention? Did they have more say in household or community decisions? Do they have full independence in deciding on which items the household income may be spent? So this way, the evaluation captures not just the results, but who benefits, who doesn't, and why. So in short, gender responsive evaluation examines how projects and programs affect men and women differently, and whether they are truly contributing to gender equality, human rights, and women's empowerment. Let's go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So, but then why giving this importance to gender equality and women's empowerment? We're talking about gender equality and empowerment. Gender equality and rights are central because both are a matter of justice and a pathway to stronger development outcomes. Without addressing inequalities, programs risk excluding half of the population and reinforce existing disparities. Ensuring equal rights creates more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable societies. For example, let's take an example of a health intervention. Okay, so if services under these health interventions are designed without considering women's needs, like maternal health, access to contraception, or even the safety of the clinics, then women's health outcomes suffer, and so do the entire communities. On the other hand, when gender equality is built into program design, evidence shows that children's health improves, poverty reduces faster, and economies grow more inclusively. So why does gender responsive evaluation matter? First, it promotes gender equality and empowerment by ensuring programs do not reinforce existing inequalities, but actively work towards change. Second, it strengthens accountability, holding institutions and the policymakers responsible for their commitments to gender equality, human rights, and frameworks and global agendas like Sustainable Development Goals, or SLEvA. Third, it improves program effectiveness by recognizing and addressing gender dynamics. We create outcomes that are more relevant, more inclusive, and sustainable. Fourth, it gives voice to the marginalized people, ensuring women's perspectives across class, caste, ethnicity, age, disability, and other intersections, shape both the evaluation and its use. And finally, the fifth, gender responsive evaluation fosters learning and innovation while aligning with the global and national kind of commitments. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So here, just I put the same kind of five most useful kind of purpose of gender responsive evaluation here in this flowchart. So I'm not explaining it. I already explained in my previous slide. Next slide, please. So in today's presentation, what we'll do, we'll touch or depend these three broad approaches to gender responsive evaluation. Okay, so gender responsive evaluation can be designed and implemented through these three broad approaches. There are many more approaches, but we will concentrate largely on these three approaches. First, at the project level, gender equality and human rights should not only be considered as a standalone criteria, but also mainstream across OECD DAC criteria of relevance, coherence, effectiveness, impact, efficiency, and sustainability. Second, evaluators can combine theory-based approaches with one or more gender analytical frameworks, including sector-specific frameworks, to deepen analysis and interpret findings in a meaningful way. And third, gender responsive evaluation increasingly draws on systems thinking and complexity-aware designs. This means using multiple approaches to assess and interpret gender equality outcomes across policies, programs, or even entire portfolio of intervention. So together, these approaches make evaluations more comprehensive, more inclusive, and ultimately more capable of capturing the real impact on gender equality and empowerment. So here I would like to hand over to my colleague Nidhi to unpack these three approaches for a better and clear understanding. Over to you, Nidhi.
Thank you so much, Rajiv, and hello to everyone who has joined us this evening. So as Rajiv has already provided us a broad overview of the key approaches that are typically used in gender responsive evaluations, what I plan to do is to delve into each of these specific approaches and highlight a couple of handy or useful frameworks and ideas that I hope that you can adapt and use in your work. Next slide, please, Pasandu. So like Rajiv had mentioned, I think one of the sort of most common ways in which gender responsive evaluations are conducted is when gender equality and social inclusion considerations are embedded within the evaluation processes and approaches. Now, what does that typically mean? I'm sure you all are familiar with the OECD criteria, but specifically, what does it mean to add a strong gender lens when analyzing the results or the results of a particular intervention in terms of transforming, say, gender relations. So for example, when you're looking at relevance, I think here a key objective is really to understand whether the intervention design has really response to right holder specific needs. Now we all know that there are differential gender needs, and through this through the relevance criteria, what we're really hoping to unpack is to what extent that is being addressed through the intervention, and does it actually address the strategic gender needs of women? Does it address the practical needs of women? It really helps you to sort of delve deeper into that. Coherence is really trying to understand to what extent is this aligned to existing policies, actors, interventions that are seeking to reduce gender inequalities. Effectiveness. Now, effectiveness is really, like Rajiv has mentioned, I think the core of evaluation is almost sometimes, there's a thrust around understanding to what extent the intervention has been effective. But from a gender lens, what this really means is whether there has been conscious effort made to ensure that no one is left behind, that the most marginalized, excluded groups are actually, their needs, their interests are actually feed into the program design and implementation, and also to what extent have there been gender differential results. Efficiency, really, again, I think this is a fairly straightforward one in terms of whether the intervention has delivered in an economical and timely manner. Sustainability, really, is it likely to continue beyond the time period of the intervention? And here I think this brings up questions around normative change, around sort of longer term behavioral change. Is that likely to be sustained once the program has ended? I'd also like to just emphasize the need for, as you set out to do a gender responsive evaluation, there's a real need to engender the evaluation process. And what we mean by that is sort of re-looking the entire sort of evaluation process, whether it be the evaluation objectives that you set out, the OECD criteria, which is sort of the most accepted and most widely used way of assessing the impact of interventions. So really sort of looking at different pieces of the evaluation process, whether it be, who, which stakeholders you engage, what kind of evaluation questions you're asking, but really adding and sort of looking at that from a gender lens. I think one of the key, if you speak to any practitioner in the gender who conducts gender responsive evaluations, I think one of the key pillars remains how do we ensure the participation and inclusion of men and women from different communities in that evaluation process. And what you see on the right side of your screen are typically, different approaches that are widely used to help foster and bring about meaningful participation of men and women within the evaluation process. So, if you talk about a utilization focused evaluation, it's really trying to understand whether the evaluation actually meets the needs of the intended users of the evaluation, and that's why it becomes so critical to involve them at the very start when you design, when you think about what you're seeking to understand through the evaluation processes. If you talk about appreciative inquiry, here again, it's really sort of unpacking and understanding from stakeholders, and this could be both rights holders as well as duty bearers, really what has worked well, say, under a particular program intervention. And that, I think, the insights and the learnings that one can gain from engaging with stakeholders in that process is key to the appreciative inquiry approach. I think with any kind of feminist approach, very outright, like Rajiv has mentioned, questions of power are forthright, right? Like who holds, how are sort of the gender relations and gender roles of society ordered? There are questions around patriarchal norms that pervade society. So feminist thinking really ensures that the voice, experiences, the lived realities of individuals from different gender groups are actually reflected in that evaluation process. I think, we've used the word empowerment, but I think when you get into gender responsive evaluation, you will, there are some, I think, key what should I say? Sort of key aspects to keep in mind, right? You will be examining aspects around, control over resources. You will be talking about normative barriers. You will be talking about aspects around agency and really the ability to make those strategic life choices. You will touch upon aspects around intersectionality and how individuals experience these intersecting inequalities in their day-to-day life. So these are, I would say, when you get into a gender responsive evaluation, be prepared. I mean, these are difficult questions to grapple with, but they're, I think, core to the entire inquiry process. And then, of course, most significant change, this is really an opportunity as an evaluator to really understand from either duty bearers or rights holders, what are those lived experiences, what are those stories of change that they have experienced as a result of the intervention. Next slide, please. So really, the second sort of approach that we want to highlight before you all is the need, when you talk about gender responsive evaluation, keep in mind it complements sort of existing theory-based approaches. Now, what do we mean by theory-based approaches? Within any program, right, there is a sort of theory of change or a pathway of change that is typically written up. Right. So what when you undertake a gender responsive evaluation, not only are you linking that larger theory of change, but you're also linking it to very specific sort of gender analysis frameworks. Now, what are gender analysis frameworks? These are basically frameworks to help you really unpack and better understand the contextual realities within which gender relationships, gender dynamics play out. And most importantly, I think, when you use any kind of gender analysis framework, it really helps you understand not just, the type of change that has happened, but also the level and the depth of that change. Like, is it, transformative change, in the sense that does it change people's normative beliefs? Does it change their behaviors? Or does it change the institutions? Larger sort of systemic, institutions of power. So I think, using a gender analysis framework with a theory of change is really helping you add that vigor and really go deep in terms of understanding those levers of change within your program. So, the next slide, please. So really here, I think we've just tried to highlight some of the common, gender analysis frameworks. Some of you might have heard of it, but I'll just, for the benefit of everyone, I'll just maybe touch upon some key aspects around these three frameworks that you see, on the screen. So when you talk about the Long Way Women's Empowerment Framework, I think it's been around for almost, more than 2.5, 3 decades, and it really looks at what does women's empowerment mean in a very practical sense. And if you just look at so it kind of in a way breaks down that black box of empowerment. So it looks at it in a sort of a high in terms of a graded level of change. So it starts off really sort of exploring what are women's practical needs, what is their level of access to different kinds of resources, assets, services. It talks about whether there's been awareness of their rights, so the entire process of conscientization. What's been their level of participation, and participation in a meaningful way in terms of their ability to take decisions that meet their strategic life needs. And finally, whether women ultimately have control over the means of production. That could be land, that could be capital, that could be technology. And usually, one thing I'd definitely like to emphasize is these frameworks, like the slide sort of indicates, are not used standalone typically. They're always used as a complement to your existing theory of change. So think of it as more of a toolkit that you can refer back to and adapt and employ based on what you're seeking to understand. Now Harvard analytical framework, I would say the key takeaway from the Harvard analytical framework is it really deep dives into the gender division of labor. So we know that women experience have sort of bear the triple role in terms of they have to take on there's a productive role in terms of income generation, there's a reproductive role in terms of supporting social reproduction, there's a collective role, so what role they play in maintaining social bonds, maintaining in mobilizing communities, as well as taking leadership. So really the Harvard analytical framework will enable you to understand in a given context, what does that gender division of labor look like? It can help you profile also what is that access to resources that men and women have, and how do they benefit from it? Because when you get into it's never enough to just look at access to resources. Ultimately you will have to explore and understand to what extent do men and women actually have meaningful control over that to ensure their control for their overall benefit. The last sort of social relations framework, this was developed by Naila Kabir. It's been around for a long time, but here I think her main point was we need to look at gender as one of the many types of social relations that exist in society. There are other social relations like caste, religion, race, all of that. But I think the key takeaway from the social relations framework is really double downing on what are those institutional and structural barriers that sort of produce and reproduce gender inequality. So there's a heavy emphasis in this framework. So if you're interested in, unpacking and understanding to what extent has, say, an intervention, brought about those larger, institutional level, say, changes, this could be a handy framework to help you map and to understand, what are those institutional gender rules, so to speak, and how they operate, and how they actually have, and how they actually sort of affect, families, the marketplace, individuals and communities, as well as the state. So maybe we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so the third sort of approach is really, keeping in mind, we're living in times of heightened change, where things are not as linear and straightforward. We're dealing with a lot of complexity, a lot of rapid changes, and I think when you undertake any kind of gender responsive evaluation, it'll be really critical to sort of keep in mind that change is emergent, and it needs to be sort of married with other mixed methods to really help you uncover and to really understand the nature of changes that an intervention brings about. I'd actually like us to focus on the right side of the screen, where we have sort of mentioned, right, like when we say gender responsive evaluation methods, like what does that really mean? And as practitioners, it's very important for us to just keep in mind some key markers of gender responsive evaluation methods. So again, it involves using gender analysis frameworks. So we've touched upon 3, but there are others which are, there are also some sector specific gender analysis frameworks that are used in agriculture, that are used in health, that depending on your sectoral expertise you can adopt it. But I think central to gender responsive evaluation methods is the use of an analytical framework to ground your analysis and make sure that it's really robust and it captures those contextual realities. Secondly, like I mentioned, borrows and heavily draws upon feminist theory and methodology. So again, the focus around power relations, that cannot be, I think, in any gender responsive evaluation. One shouldn't shy away from looking at these issues. Third is really, I would say, I mean, definitely when we talk about gender, I think here again, men and women, but we know that, we need to go beyond the gender binary. And I think it's also very important in gender responsive evaluation methods to see whether the intervention really addresses the needs of transgender individuals as well, and whether it's appropriate and relevant for them. Participatory, very, very important. I think in our previous slides, we've kind of highlighted some of the tools that you can use, some of the approaches like the utilization focused evaluation, most significant change. So these are ways in which you can really elevate the voice and experiences of duty bearers, rights holders in an intervention, and give them their due credit and space. Another aspect is around collecting gender disaggregated data. In fact, Rajiv, before this call, we were discussing, sometimes people assume, oh, I've disaggregated the data, that makes this, in a way, gender responsive. I think, that's inaccurate. And I think what I would urge you is that this is sort of, your gender disaggregated data is one way to enable you to kind of see patterns, to kind of help you, pinpoint and really see like where are the gaps, where are the barriers, yeah. So gender disaggregated data is a must. And then, of course, aspects around addressing gender roles, power relations, like I mentioned, and then definitely, being culturally sensitive, being context specific. I think these are very, very, that adds that level of nuance to your analysis. And I think another hallmark of a gender responsive evaluation is the use of mixed methods. So, complementing qualitative research methods with quantitative methods. This would be surveys. There are a whole host of quantitative methods one can use to triangulate your findings, to really do that meaning making. Moving forward, I think what we'll just given that there are, I think we also want to emphasize there are a number of gender responsive evaluation methods and tools, but I thought for today maybe let's just focus on the gender results effectiveness scale. This is again something that's used a lot in UN led evaluations. It's a great way for you to capture and understand what's the kind of quality and the type of gender results that that the intervention has achieved. And then, of course, outcome mapping is really great if you're looking at complex interventions when there is no one single actor that has kind of contributed to that larger story of change. And I think here again we want to emphasize, when we think of evaluations, we always think of it as this accountability kind of exercise. But I think a key aspect around gender responsive evaluation is learning and using these different tools as a way for you to learn and also unlearn unlearn what you see and on the ground. So maybe if you move to the next slide, we can just quickly delve into what the gender results effectiveness scale. So again, think of it, this is like a graded scale, gender. To be honest, I mean, nowadays we really don't hear a lot of interventions that are gender negative. But having said that, there is gender backlash globally on a number of fronts. So never say never, but yeah, ideally, you have interventions that are gender negative. Hopefully we see fewer and fewer of them. And then, of course, on the other sort of end of the spectrum, we have gender transformative. So what is gender transformative? Gender transformative is more sort of longer term change. It's change that goes beyond the time frame of the intervention. And think of it as, when you say transform, like transform what? Like it transforms the underlying norms, like I mentioned, right? The patriarchal norms of society. It's really transforming people's mindsets, attitudes, behaviors. It's really getting at what I can say to be like the root causes of gender inequality in society. So gender transformative is that's kind of like the we one should work, I guess, towards ensuring that all interventions lead up to gender transformative changes. But a step before that is what I would say is gender responsive, and that's our focus of today. So a gender responsive result would essentially mean, does it address the specific gender barriers and gaps that are faced by men and women from different from different population groups? To what extent has the intervention addressed intersectional identities and accounted for that in the program design and implementation? So it's really accounting for the differences in gender roles and gender relations, and acting upon it in the course through various program interventions and activities. Gender targeted is, it's kind of typically, like I would say, more gender specific in a way. So does it target men and women equally? yeah, not a huge, I mean, it's a good starting point, but yeah, if we really want to talk about transformative change and long-term meaningful change, we really have to work towards understanding and interventions that actually address and actively sort of seek to reduce the gender barriers faced by different population groups. So yeah, so next slide, please. Okay, so outcome mapping. I think outcome mapping, again, this is, in evaluations, like we were mentioning earlier, I think one of the key questions that always haunts all evaluators is the attribution question, right? Like everyone wants to know, we've done all this hard work. Now, how do we kind of account, like, was it us or was it a combination of different factors? But I think with outcome mapping, it really accounts for that complexity of different, the complexity of the development, ecosystem that we work within. And it really helps you to kind of understand the organization's contribution to specific gender equality outcomes. Now, what do we mean by outcomes? Like typically, again, you must have, you'll be familiar with the theory of change, where you have, your inputs, activities, outputs are more the short term. Outcomes are really, what is that longer term change that you're hoping to achieve through the intervention. So again, outcome mapping helps you to capture that complexity of the change process, like that pathway of change, like what is it, what change are we seeking to bring about. And if you look at it, if you look at the top half, which is the expect to see, like to see, love to see, hope not to see. So the expect to see is, say you did a training on digital literacy, for example. So I would at least expect to see that, whoever I've trained, say the women that I've trained, they, know the basics of how to use a smartphone, because that's like a direct result of my training. Like to see would be, okay, I've given them this basic digital literacy training. Now I'd like to see, the women actually use different applications and platforms for a variety of purposes. It could be to connect to families, it could be to learn a new design potentially. Love to see, again, think of it more in terms of the larger transformational change. This usually happens well beyond the interventions time frame. So love to see would really be like, okay, what, as a result of the digital literacy, are women now able to use, say, digital platforms to for business, for being connected to the digital economy, for income generation. So again, it's kind of again helping one capture that graded level of change, where it's from short term, medium term, long term, and really helping you unpack that with your evaluation stakeholders, where they also get to reflect and think about what are those outcomes that have been achieved as a result of the intervention. So the next, I won't spend a lot of time on the table below. This is, I would say, relates more to the next slide, but yeah, you could move to the next slide. Thanks. So, again, why are we talking about contribution analysis within a gender responsive evaluation? Because it, as Rajib had mentioned, it's very, very important to understand to what extent and how and why your intervention has led to those to those changes in roles or relations, or in terms of access and control over resources. I think here want to emphasize that, especially in an evolving development scenario where change, again, it's emergent, it's constantly fluid, contribution analysis just enables you to gather systematically evidence of, gender outcomes, and thereafter validating that, fine-tuning that, and working with evaluation stakeholders, both duty bearers and with right holders, in terms of understanding what has been the organization or the intervention's contribution to gender equality outcomes. And this table is just a way in terms of how, where you gather the evidence of these different outcomes, or observed, you can call them, your observed changes, and helping you sort of map out what has been the nature of contribution, what has been the level of contribution. Has it been, a very surface level contribution, or does it really have you contributed to that long-term transformative change? So it really tells you how and why the intervention has made a difference in the lives of men and women, and what are those mechanisms through which it has contributed. So I'll pause here, and I would actually request Rajiv if he could add on, based on his extensive experience, any examples, anything to make it more clear to our guests today. Yeah.
Thanks, Nidhi. Not much to add here. I think you explained very nicely, beautifully, and different kind of approaches, and most important and most fundamental kind of frameworks and systems that you can integrate in your evaluation to conduct it from a gender responsive lens. But in the meantime, I saw a question here from one of the participants. I understand that, because there are different kind of vocabularies and perspectives are used in conducting evaluation. Very quickly, let me touch one thing here. This gender, what is gender responsive evaluation? I think we began with that question. It ensures that evaluation systematically assess how programs affect men, women, and other genders groups differently, and whether they promote or hinder any gender equality, or about mainstreaming gender into evaluation practice. Okay, but we have a lot of other kind of approaches, like we talked about gender transformative evaluation. There is also a lot of people talk about feminist evaluation. So in my opinion, feminist evaluation and gender transformative evaluation is very, very similar, because they also goes one step further. So it's not only assessing gender differences, but explicitly seeks to challenge and transform those gender norms or power relations or structural inequalities in the society, to address these fundamental barriers to bring equality. So in my opinion, gender responsive evaluation is necessary foundation, and gender transformative evaluation or feminist evaluation more aspirational and deeper kind of shift in power structure and discrimination. So, but still, then why you are talking about gender responsive evaluation? If you really want to remove those barriers that cause the gender differences, then why we are talking about gender responsive evaluation? So I mean, I think this is a very valid question, and a lot of people ask this question. So, in my opinion, gender responsive evaluations offer kind of a practical entry point, to ensure that this minimum kind of gender dimensions are addressed, considered. The voices of women or other genders are included in these kind of interventions and evaluations. So also, let me give you another example. As I mentioned, I think in the initially, the gender responsive evaluation, I think Nidhi also mentioned it, that gender evaluation will ask, when we conduct an evaluation with the gender responsive lens, did women, men benefit equally, or what are were there any barriers in women's participation, and did the program address those kind of barriers? But feminist evaluation will go one step further, and it will ask a fundamental question that this particular intervention, did it shift any gender norm around women working outside home? Did it address, did it reduce that women's work burden? So I think Nidhi mentioned about triple burden on women. So they do both paid work and unpaid work. And then it really increase. I think I also mentioned the decision-making power in the household. So it's more about like, at what level and what kind of level you are asking these questions. But, practical reason, because it's sometimes the intervention is not ready, maybe to kind of like, to bring that very fundamental question. It might be very useful at that level to pose questions which is at the gender responsive level. I would like to stop here. Thank you. Nidhi, you want to address? I think there is one more question, or maybe the moderator would like to.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rajib and Ms. Nidhi, for your excellent presentations and explanations. And Dr. Rajib has already addressed certain questions, and now there's a very lengthy question by Tilini. What are your experiences using gender analysis frameworks in an evaluation, and the time of the evaluation period? Inception phase can take a while, especially if the commissioners of the evaluation had not considered this. Or does it get easier with more experience? The other thing is how to have this conversation in programs that are already targeting women and feel they had an inclusive criteria of targeting marginalized women. In these cases, are we holding the intervention to standards too high? Finally, is the contribution analysis stable based on qualitative evidence largely?
Nidhi, would to like to start maybe about the frameworks and exactly when those frameworks can be applied? Can start maybe at that level, or maybe point the negotiations is definitely very, very important evaluation, any evaluation.
Yeah, I think it starts really at the inception stage itself, Maheeka, because typically in the evaluation cycle, the inception stage is a stage where you can really sort of, you have a chance to review some of the key documents, and then one can kind of, like I said, use an appropriate gender analysis framework in conjunction with your theory of change led approach. I think I guess I missed that, but then if you look at the gender at work, this quadrant of change, that's actually a very popular and actually a very handy tool and approach to map. And maybe if we could pull it up, Pasindu, on the screen, I think that'll also be helpful for everybody. I think that's a great tool to kind of unpack, at what level is the intervention making the change, like at the institutional level, at the individual level, formal, informal. And I've actually used that when I was looking at examining sort of women's leadership in a federation. I think we adopted the gender at work quadrant of change to help us sort of analyze and to come up with a more structured analysis of how the leadership building program for women who are a part of the federation, what type of changes did the intervention contribute to, at what level. I think that's when I use that. That's a concrete example of having used a gender analysis framework in conjunction with the program's existing theory of change. I missed your second question, Maheeka, sorry.
So actually it was typed by Tilini. Tilini, are you there? Can you ask the question from Snidhi?
Hi, yes. Basically, my second question was based on personal experience of, when you are evaluating a program that's already targeting marginalized women, and you are trying to have a conversation about, the type of women who are being included. Is it, inclusive of LGBTQI plus communities? So there I felt inexperienced to have a conversation like this. And I just wanted to pick your brains and understand, what your experiences are in having these kind of conversations. And I grappled with the question of whether we were trying to hold the interventions to some high standards that were not really necessary in this context. Thanks.
It actually depends also how, say, communities are involved in that evaluation processes. My experience is sometimes, given you have limited time, it's almost, you don't, how should I say, like, you don't want to make, like when we say participation, right? And if it has to really be meaningful, then it really means co-designing, in a sense, with them. What are those evaluation questions? What are the co-designing with them or understanding with them? What are those outcomes that the program has, that the program should bring about? I think that scope, right? If it is not, how should I say, if it's not designed intentionally from the very start, then it becomes, I think, more difficult when you undertake such a process at the evaluation stage. So I think at the inception stage, right, that's a real opportunity to sit down with the commissioners and have that frank conversation in terms of what is it that who are we really including in this evaluations, whose voices and experiences are we elevating and whose are we excluding, and really sort of taking a call on that together. I don't have a straightforward answer to your question. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thanks.
And I see Dr. Rajib and Ms. Nidhi has typed answers for certain questions in the chat box. So hope you're satisfied with the answers you got, or do you want to get further clarifications about the responses you get? This is the time for you to unmute and ask. Okay, in the event of no more questions, shall we move to the next?
Can I raise a question? I'm Ranjit Tabru from SLEvA. What I felt is that you are suggesting that we apply gender equality and women's empowerment across all the M&E assignments. Is that correct? Because sometimes the input from the women may not be very critical in looking at it. If, for example, if you look at a fisheries harbor being built, what is the input that can be put in by the women that will add value to the M&E process? Because it's a men-only project actually, and it is their inputs that needs to be looked at actually.
Go ahead, Nidhi, if you to address.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing we have to say, evaluation, it's monitoring and evaluation. So even when we talk about gender responsive evaluation, it's absolutely critical that a gender and social inclusion lens is embedded in the monitoring process when you're collecting the data from different gender groups, from different population groups. I think that is absolutely necessary. I think I beg to differ on the fisheries example, because yes, on the face of it, we're talking about male fisher folk, but fishermen, sorry. But, if you did a gender analysis, you'd be surprised to see in that entire, say, value chain, how critical, say, women, what role exactly they play. Because many a time when men are away at sea, it's the women who are, managing the household. They are often the ones who are, sell the fish as local vendors. So I think, we really have to unpack even our own assumptions and understanding. Or, sometimes people say, if you look at, I don't know, some technical field like solar energy, like what does that got to do with gender? But then again, energy needs, like who is consuming what, I think we really need to think with a gender analysis. You are able, and through a gender responsive evaluation that uses a gender analytical framework, you're really able to unpack and understand what these gender roles, relations, access, control over resources, all these questions really come into play. It's and I think we definitely need to apply a more holistic lens. Yeah, I'll pause there, but yeah, please, Rajiv.
I think that's nicely answered. So a lot of time it appears, I'm not talking about the fisheries because I don't have any experience in the fisheries, but I worked on leather industry here in India, which apparently again seems that no, it's a male dominated kind of industry. But what I found exactly that this kind of like depend kind of like data analysis showed that a lot of women's work is also involved there in the leather industry, which is totally invisible. Okay, because they work from home, they don't work in the industries. So if you don't do this kind of like analysis and depend kind of inquiry, you fail to understand like that a lot of people, women are also involved in the industry, and they are not at the forefront, so you miss them and miss their voices. But yeah, so these are definitely important. But even otherwise, if it's a male dominated kind of like industry, and if you think that no, it's only men, no, female are absolutely not kind of involved, like going to the deep sea and fishing, then I think we have to use different kind of intersectionality lens there. So like who are those men, like the age kind of thing, the different kind of community background, the regional background. So those kind of like complexities we may capture, which is part of that feminist evaluation approach. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajib and Ms. Nidhi, for your excellent presentations and excellent clarifications. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, thanking remarks will be done by Ms. Chandrika Mathavan, Financial Analyst at the Department of Public Enterprises, Ministry of Finance. Over to you, Ms. Chandrika.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of SLEvA, it is my great privilege to extend the word of thanks for today's insightful session. First and foremost, our heartfelt gratitude goes to our distinguished speakers, Dr. Rajib Nandi and Ms. Nidhi Sen, for sharing your valuable knowledge and perspective on gender responsiveness evaluation. Your insights have truly enriched today's discussion. I also wish to extend our sincere thanks to our moderator, Professor Maheeka Seneviwikrama, for skillfully guiding the session, and to Ms. Vennila Thevarajah for her thoughtful opening remarks. A special word of appreciation goes to our President, Mr. Amil Epper, for his leadership, and to the Academic and Capacity Building Committee for creating this important learning platform. Special thanks go to our Professor Hemanthi Ranasinghe, Chair of the Committee, and Mr. Randik Dimel, co-leader of the Academic and Capacity Building Committee. Behind the scenes, a big thanks go to our coordinator, Mr. Pasindu, for his dedicated and hard work in making this webinar a success. Finally, to all participants, thank you for joining us and engaging so actively. Your participation makes this session truly meaningful. Before we close, I am pleased to remind you about our next webinar in this series, Environmental Safeguards in Action, Implementing Effective Monitoring and Evaluation for Environmental and Social Management Plans. Throughout project life cycles, the registration link will be shared shortly, and we warmly invite you to invite for the session. With that, we bring today's program to close. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye
Thank you,
bye.
everyone. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Good night. Thank you.